Cyberpunk 2077 is one of the more interesting games to come out in the last few years. Intense action with deep RPG elements in a futuristic dystopian city. How can you not love it? Jokes aside, I actually really enjoyed Cyberpunk 2077 despite its issues at launch. Playing it for hours on end had me interested in the cyberpunk genre or aesthetic. I thought, why not check out other cyberpunk style games? This is Shadowrun, a cyberpunk game that was released for the Super Nintendo in 1993. Just like Cyberpunk 2077, this game is based off of a tabletop RPG of the same name. There's also a Shadowrun game that was released for the Genesis, and for some reason, like many multi-platform releases of the time, these two games are completely different. Supposedly, the Genesis game is closer to the pen and paper RPG, although I have not yet played it. This game is one of a kind. Think about the typical role-playing games on Super Nintendo. Most RPGs on this system, like Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VI, Earthbound, are turn-based RPGs where you take turns attacking in a battle. Other games, like Secret of Mana, are considered action RPGs where the combat is still based on dice rolls, but it is more real-time. And you can sprinkle in some tactical RPGs like Tactics Ogre or Fire Emblem. Now think about the setting for all of these games. Mostly fantasy, with maybe some sci-fi elements. Now let's look at Shadowrun. Shadowrun is different in both the gameplay style and the setting compared to the more well-known RPGs. We can kind of compare this game to the first two Fallout games. Isometric view, point-and-click style of gameplay, speech system, and more. By the way, if you like Fallout and haven't played the originals, give them a shot. I absolutely love Fallout 1 and 2. So yeah, I know the video is titled Cyberpunk, but in reality, this game is much closer to Fallout. I think the best way to briefly describe this game is to compare it to Fallout, because Lord knows I love to do comparisons on this channel. Let's start with the first thing you notice in the game, the visuals. It's an isometric view with 2D sprites that give it a visually appealing look. Yeah, the sprites are sometimes dark, but they fit in with the overall tone of the game. You control your character, who is named Jake Armitage. In the intro cutscene, Jake gets absolutely murked on the street by a gang, and then some being comes by and revives him. You take control of him in a morgue after he stumbles out of the cabinet. The way the controls work is this. You move Jake around with the D-pad, but the D-pad also controls the cursor, which is toggled by certain buttons. That's right, a cursor on an SNES game. And this is what might make or break your experience with this game. I played this game on a physical system first, and it wasn't too bad. Controlling the cursor with the D-pad can get pretty tedious, and if you're not quick enough, it can even get you killed. I never got super far while playing the game on physical hardware. However, there is a ROM hack of this game where you can control the mouse with the SNES mouse. How neat. With this, you can use the SNES mouse or even an aftermarket one, which you can still get brand new from Hyperkin. Or you can just use an emulator. This makes the game a lot more playable, and this is kind of what gave it a Fallout feel for me. For this playthrough, I ended up just playing this game like a PC game by using WASD for movement and the mouse for interactions and combat. This control setup gives the game a point-and-click style of gameplay, and I like the way the point-and-click style is presented, especially in the first screen of the game. You have to find clues or items to progress out of this first room. It kind of teaches you that only specific objects are interactable, and that there are contextual actions depending on what you are interacting with. Once you get out of the room and the building, you are now out in the street, and that's it. You see a guy passing by and he talks to you briefly, but other than that, you are free to explore the city with not much direction. This is pretty impressive for a Super Nintendo game. I love the way the streets are presented in this isometric view, and the way you go through a street or an alleyway, which brings you to a different part of the city. This perspective of the game window figuratively sits in the middle of the typical games on the system, which are side-scrollers or at a top-down view. For this game, I would just recommend going out and exploring, interacting with people, and getting a feel of the city. After a while, you will start to familiarize yourself with the layout of the city. At the same time, you can see which areas you should avoid, as you will get shot at out of a window or a dumpster. You can't do much at first when you are unarmed. Eventually, you'll find a dead guy with a gun. You can loot his body and you will find your first weapon. Woohoo! You also run into a strange dog who seems to have a watchful eye over you, and it gives you a feeling that even within the chaos of the city, there's something even stranger going on. Once you get your first weapon, you can finally fight back at those random attackers out of the windows, or those gang members hiding in various buildings. The gun mechanics are kind of funny. Because of the way that the game was originally designed, with the slower movements of the D-pad in mind, you aim the cursor at your enemy and you just click the fire button. Each shot is a dice roll, which will increase the damage range depending on your level and the weapon you are using. This can lead to some pretty funny encounters. Eventually, you'll gain enough experience to level up, which is denoted as karma. You get to choose different skills to level up, which is limited at first, but once you unlock other abilities, there are more level ups to choose from. Speaking of abilities, you're not only limited to your firearm, you also have throwable grenades and magic spells, which can be really powerful. Moving on from weapons, one of the other key aspects to this game's gameplay is the interaction with the NPCs. You can talk to just about any NPC in this game, although some might not be super helpful. When you speak to anyone, you can ask about specific topics which may give you more clues or even more dialogue options to progress the story. It's pretty useful early on when you're learning about the game world and its inhabitants. One downside is that you may end up wasting time clicking on each dialogue option, which might lead you nowhere, although if you use context clues, it might save you some time. You wouldn't ask a doctor about where to get firearms, for example. Eventually, you can even hire companions to accompany you on a mission and, save your ass from getting killed. And sometimes getting them killed. Whoops. Sorry, pal. Eventually, you start to travel to different parts of the city, which you can fast travel between by boarding a train. I quite like this part. I don't know why. The game continues on, and what kept me going was the different areas. Like, for example, the mobsters by the pier, the weird graveyard with zombies, the corporate regime who will shoot you on sight, the fighting ring and the junkyard where you go up the ranks. There's just a lot going on. I don't really need to get into the story to avoid spoilers, although I guess it doesn't matter much for an obscure 30-plus-year-old game. Let's just say that things get a little weird. And it's kind of foreshadowed with that mystical dog in the beginning. One thing that I didn't really care for is the hacking minigames that you reach later on. It didn't add much value to my playthrough, but at least they weren't tediously long. Other than that, I didn't really find much issues with this game. Even if you're having a tough time, grinding level ups is fairly quick. I would just run through the graveyard a bunch of times to build up some levels. The music is also pretty good. It's not a standout soundtrack for the system, although I did find myself humming a lot of the music in this game for a few weeks. I'd say it fits the overall dark and grimy tone of the game. But I think that about wraps it up with this one. If you do have any interest in this game and enjoy the older CRPGs like Fallout, I'd say give this one a shot with the mouse ROM hack. You might end up enjoying it, at least I did. Thank you everyone for watching, and I do apologize for the long hiatus. I do appreciate all the love and support, and if you have any comments or corrections, please let me know in the comments below. I even enjoy reading the hate comments, so please keep that up too. Peace out.